The stars were silent witnesses until the screaming began. Convoy Theta 9 requesting immediate assistance. The transmission crackled, splintered by static and the telltale hum of interference. Under fire. Where this is a medical non-combatant. The signal died mid-sentence, followed by a sound unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in the vacuum, a ship's hull tearing open like wet paper. Across a dozen channels, emergency beacons bloomed and then flickered out, one by one, like candles snuffed under a cold wind. In Earth orbit, aboard the UNSC Meridian, Fleet Admiral Alina Korolev stood in silence as the final message replayed on the bridge. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Around her, aides and officers exchanged uneasy glances, afraid to speak first. The convoy had been carrying food, medical supplies, and field surgeons to the drought-stricken colony of Eos Prime, a multi-species settlement under the Galaxis Accord's protection. 57 ships, 312 crew, 42 volunteer physicians from Earth and Mars. No weapons, no escort, just bright orange paint along the hulls and glowing medical insignias larger than escape hatches. It should have been safe. It should have been sacred. They knew, said Captain Harlan Vu, eyes locked on the playback. They knew what those ships were. Korolev didn't answer. Her gaze was on the still frame, the last image from the Mercy's Reach, convoy flagship, frozen just before impact. A sleek alien cruiser, its engines glowing blue with energy, weapons hot. No markings, no warnings. Just violence. She turned, her voice low. Any survivors? No confirmed signals yet. Search drones are en route, said an ensign, fidgeting. But the debris field is extensive. Korolev stepped back, arms crossed. There was no battle. No skirmish. This wasn't an accident. This was annihilation. On Earth, the news spread in waves, first to the families, then the networks, then the public. Across nations and colonies, the footage aired on every frequency. Orange ships drifting in silence, some torn open, others vaporized. The public outcry was immediate and unified, an increasingly rare thing. In a modest home on the outskirts of Nairobi, Dr. Leo Mendonza watched the feed with a hand over his mouth. His sister, Dr. Eva Mendonza, had been on the Mercy's Reach. Her last message, sent only hours before, had been a cheerful update about the colony's weather. She had laughed, said she'd try Eosian tea. Then silence. His wife, Mira, gripped his hand tightly but said nothing. What could she say? The tragedy didn't just ripple, it surged. At the General Assembly in Geneva orbit, the debate that followed lasted precisely 11 minutes. Not about if to respond, but how fast. They fired on healers, said Representative Okoye of the African Confederation, standing with clenched fists. On surgeons and medics, not soldiers. This is not an act of war. It is an act of murder. And humanity must answer. Others nodded grimly. Even those usually cautious, usually diplomatic, offered no objection. There was no protest. No plea for peace. Just the raw, quiet tension of a species that had already decided. Back aboard the UNSC Meridian, Korolev stood once more at the Central Command podium, staring at the darkened expanse of stars through the observation screen. The deck beneath her boots hummed with energy, the massive warship readying for acceleration. A technician approached. The black box from Mercy's Reach was recovered. There's a final recording. Play it. The voice was calm, composed, even as chaos raged in the background. Dr. Eva Mendonza. This is Dr. Mendonza aboard Mercy's Reach. To whoever finds this, know that we tried. We warned them, we were medics. We lit our signal beacons, we followed protocols. We didn't fight. We couldn't. But they didn't care. They saw us, and they fired anyway. She paused. There was a sound of metal groaning, someone shouting off mic. Then her voice again, softer. If this is war, then let Earth remember who fired first. The message ended. Korolev exhaled slowly. Then, with steel in her spine, she issued a single order. Prepare the fleet. The bridge erupted into motion. Across the Terran sphere, From Earth to Mars to the deep colonies orbiting distant stars, fleets powered up. Ships that had not seen battle in decades warmed their weapons. Special forces were recalled. Commanders received sealed orders. There would be no grand speeches. No posturing. Just motion. Aboard a small freighter on a quiet transport run, Corporal Nira Solis received an encrypted burst message. She opened it, eyes widening as she read. Her pilot looked over, concerned. Is it war? Nira didn't answer. She just strapped in, her voice flat. They hit a rescue convoy. The pilot swore under his breath. In the halls of the Galactic Council, news of Earth's mobilization spread like lightning. Ambassadors scrambled, confused by the speed of it. Protests were drafted, then shelved. No one wanted to be the first to tell humanity to slow down, not after the footage, not after those screams. And somewhere, in a quiet asteroid belt far from prying sensors, a lone ship powered down its stealth systems. It belonged to the alien faction responsible for the attack, its crew calm, calculating. They had expected Earth to hesitate, to deliberate, to fracture. They had made a terrible mistake. Back on Earth, Leo Mendonza stood at the wall in his home, looking at the photo of his sister, smiling, wind-blown hair, a stethoscope slung around her neck. He traced the frame's edge with his finger. Outside, the sky was beginning to dim. Above it, humanity was already in motion. And the stars were about to remember why Earth was never to be provoked. The fleet departed Earth orbit under the cover of darkness, not for secrecy, but because it was faster than waiting for dawn. Admiral Alina Korolev stood in the CIC of the UNSC Meridian, hands clasped behind her back, gaze fixed on the tactical holograms unfolding before her. 40 ships in formation. Not the full force of Earth's Navy, but enough. Enough to make a statement. Enough to send a message written in steel and fire. Captain Harlan Vu monitored the readouts beside her, his voice low. Fleet synchronized. Jump coordinates locked. Target confirmed. Korolev nodded once. Execute. A heartbeat later, space split open. The enemy installation hung in the darkness of Sector 12 Theta, a fortified listening post orbiting an ice giant, strategically insignificant, but undeniably linked to the aggressors. Surveillance data, intercepted comms, and the surviving fragments of the Mercy's reach all pointed here. No more deniability. No more doubt. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace with cold precision. No preamble. No parley. The alien station, caught mid-shift rotation, barely had time to raise shields before the first salvo landed. The UNSC Sirocco peeled forward, launching a railgun strike that shattered the outer defense grid in one clean arc. Following behind, the Fury of Warsaw deployed assault drones, each carrying smart ordnance tuned to slip past conventional shielding. Korolev didn't watch the destruction. She watched the enemy's reaction. The defenders scrambled, confused. Too slow. Still no hails? She asked. Vu shook his head. Not a word. Then we keep going. Fire stitched the stars. Defense turrets came online too late, targeting systems lagging behind. The enemy ships that managed to scramble from the hangars were vaporized before they cleared the defense perimeter. Down below, in the belly of the UNSC Vanguard, Corporal Nira Solis braced as her dropship detached. The interior rattled with force. Her armor sealed tight, HUD flaring alive. Ground team, prepare for hard entry, came the pilot's voice, calm and practiced. Nira glanced across the cabin. Faces she knew, Lieutenant Park, Corporal Daw, Reyes, silent behind their visors. Professionals, every one of them. Not brutes. Not killers. But trained to move fast and end things quickly. They didn't chant or pray. There was no need. They had their orders. The dropship punched through the station's outer hull like a dagger, releasing its payload of soldiers into corridors that burned and twisted under decompression. Nira led her team forward, weapons steady, every movement drilled, decisive. They met scattered resistance. Alien soldiers panicked, under-equipped. No organization. No command. She didn't fire until she had to. When she did, she didn't miss. The enemy faltered, retreating down side halls and emergency shafts. Some tried to surrender, but Nira had no authority to take prisoners. Orders were to neutralize command nodes and extract any intel.
Fast. Clean.
Minimal civilian casualties, if any even existed on this isolated outpost. In the command core, Lieutenant Park planted a data spike into the central nexus, his voice tense. We're pulling comm records. Internal logs are encrypted, but we've got enough. It's them. Same transponder code that tagged Mercy's reach. Nira's grip tightened. That name again. She hadn't known anyone on the convoy, but she'd seen the footage like everyone else. The look in her commanding officer's eyes had been enough. Orders, she asked.
Plant charges.
We leave nothing they can rebuild. By the time the ground teams extracted, the station was bleeding atmosphere, its systems shredded from within. Korolev watched from the bridge as the human ships pulled away in formation. Behind them, the enemy station collapsed in on itself, debris scattering in slow, silent arcs. She didn't smile. There was no victory here, only necessity. Transmission from the Galactic Council, Vu said, handing her a datapad. They're not pleased. Korolev scanned it. Diplomatic protests, urgent calls for restraint, veiled language dressed in bureaucracy. She scrolled to the end. No threat, just concern. They still don't understand, she muttered. We didn't do this to escalate. We did this because they thought we wouldn't. The council would convene. Speeches would be made. But the damage, both to the enemy and to Earth's image, was already done. Across galactic media, reactions were polarizing. Some condemned the strike as disproportionate. Others admired its precision, its resolve. Humanity had responded without pause, without hesitation, without compromise. They had drawn a line. In the quiet after the battle, Nira sat in the barracks of the vanguard, armor off, hands still trembling slightly. Across from her, Dahl lit a cigarette, exhaling slowly. Feels weird, he said after a moment. Going in like that. No time to breathe. Nira nodded. They didn't give the convoy a breath either. Silence stretched. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Think they'll hit back?
Dahl asked.
She didn't answer right away. She thought about the station, the terrified defenders, the ones who never expected Earth to hit so hard, so fast. Then she remembered the black box recording. They saw us, and they fired anyway.
They might, she said.
But if they do, we'll be ready. Elsewhere, on the far side of human territory, Leo Mendonza sat in a listening chamber deep within the Terran Memorial Complex. In his lap, a simple tablet displayed the final message from his sister. Again and again. He could not stop watching it. Not yet. Not until he believed it. Around him, others mourned. Some cried. Some stared ahead, hollow and stunned. But there was something else too, just beneath the sorrow. Not rage, not vengeance. Something older, steadier, resolve. In the great unknown, across the cold vacuum, the enemy licked its wounds, stunned by the speed of retaliation. They had not expected Earth's unity. Had misread their silence as weakness. Had misunderstood what it meant to strike healers. It would not be a long war, but it would be loud. The stars over Eos Prime shimmered faintly, as if trying to forget the violence they'd witnessed. From the surface, where the colony still struggled to breathe beneath the weight of its tragedy, the new medical convoy finally arrived, escorted this time by a full fleet. There were no speeches. Supplies were offloaded, surgeries began, and graves were marked in quiet rows outside the settlement's boundary walls. Dr. Leo Mendonza stepped onto Eosian soil carrying his sister's stethoscope. It was the only thing recovered intact from the wreckage of the Mercy's Reach. He had requested this assignment personally. He was not a soldier, not a policymaker. But this, he could do. He could finish what Eva had started. Children stared from behind corners, curious about the newcomers. Their eyes were wary, too old for their years. Many had watched the sky burn when the rescue fleet was destroyed. Some had lost parents waiting for medical aid that never came. Leo moved among them without fanfare, offering bandages and soft words, taking vital signs, listening to stories no one else had asked to hear. It wasn't penance. It was purpose. Elsewhere, orbiting above, the UNSC Meridian drifted in silence, while the diplomatic channels flared with noise. In the chambers of the Galactic Council, Earth's response had sparked fury. Delegates from neutral systems demanded accountability, afraid of setting a precedent where vengeance replaced protocol. But others, those with longer memories, remained silent. They remembered Earth's history. They knew how deep the well ran when humans believed they were protecting their own. Admiral Korolev sat in a private chamber linked to the council, her posture a sculpture of restraint. Across from her, the image of Ambassador Thalanyar flickered. He represented a faction not responsible for the attack, but politically adjacent, an uneasy ally of both sides. Retaliation invites escalation, Thalanyar said, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that passed for concern. There are those in your galaxy who fear what humanity might become. Korolev didn't flinch. Humanity became what it needed to be the moment unarmed medics were targeted. Even so, he replied, you must know the original order to fire came not from Central Command. A rogue fleet. Undisciplined. Perhaps even acting under false data. We suspected as much, she said quietly, which is why we left the command centers untouched. That gave the ambassador pause. Mercy, then? No, Korolev said. Clarity. The ones who gave that order will reveal themselves. They always do. And when they do, there won't be ambiguity. Back on the colony, Leo helped an elderly Eocean woman to her feet, her hands trembling from untreated nerve degeneration. He offered her support as she walked toward the triage tent, her whisper barely audible. Your eyes, she said. Like your sister's. Always watching. Leo smiled faintly, adjusting her blanket. After nightfall, when the temperature dropped and the winds from the desert rolled in, he sat beneath the half-assembled memorial dome. It would house the names of every crew member lost in the attack, human and non-human alike. The architects had left space for more names. Just in case. A flicker of motion drew his eye. A small boy stood at the edge of the dome, hesitant. He held out a folded piece of paper. Leo opened it. A rough sketch of a ship, surrounded by stars, with orange medical crosses on the hull. They were heroes, the boy said. Leo nodded, folding the drawing carefully and placing it beside Eva's stethoscope. Yes, they were. On the outer rim of the conflict zone, Earth's forces had pulled back, but not fully. A line had been drawn, not in arrogance, but in warning. It was clear now to every major power that Earth's tolerance had limits, and those limits had been reached. But Earth had not gone looking for war. The response had been sharp, immediate, and exact. No colonies were seized. No enemy planets bombarded. Just one installation dismantled, one fleet humbled, and one very clear message left behind. The rogue fleet that had fired the first shot? Disavowed by its own people. Publicly denounced. Silently hunted. Within weeks, its admiral was captured by his own species and handed over to Earth's jurisdiction. An unprecedented act. The trial, when it came, was short. He admitted it all. Misinterpreted scans, paranoia, disregard for the treaty. He had assumed humanity would hesitate, or perhaps splinter into debate. Instead, they had come without fear, without waiting. When asked if he regretted the attack, he did not speak. When asked if he understood why humanity responded as it did, he finally looked up. They loved the ones on those ships, he said. And I killed them. I knew what was coming after. In the end, the Council acknowledged Earth's actions without endorsement. The Galaxis Accord was updated, clarified. Rescue vessels were now to be treated as sacred under all conditions. No interpretation. No exceptions. Korolev retired 2 months later. Not in disgrace, nor in triumph. Just in quiet completion. At her final debrief, she left a single note behind on her personal console. Not addressed to any one person. Just a sentence. We went to war so others wouldn't have to doubt our resolve again. On Eos Prime, the memorial dome was completed. At its center, A black box, restored, preserved, mounted beneath crystal. Every hour, on the hour, it played the final message from the Mercy's reach. Not as a call to arms, but as a promise. Dr. Mendonza never left the colony. He stayed long after the cameras and press disappeared, long after the warships returned home. The people there needed more than a symbol. They needed someone who knew what had been lost. Someone who still carried a voice, even after it had been silenced. Years later, when asked why Earth responded with such fire, such precision, such unwavering force, historians offered countless explanations. But the children of Eos Prime didn't need history books. They had seen the sky break open and deliver vengeance. And then peace. Because Earth had remembered. And made sure the stars did too. The silence between stars had never felt so fragile. 5 years had passed since the destruction of the Mercy's reach, yet echoes of its last transmission still drifted through subspace archives, archived in 1,000 languages, preserved as a warning. The war that followed had been brief, surgical, brutal in its efficiency, but it left behind ripples that would take generations to settle. On the outer fringe of human space, deep in the cobalt-shadowed skies of Port Leary, a new station now rose in orbit, the Eva Mendonza Memorial Platform. Named not for a general or admiral, but for a physician, one who had carried hope in place of a sidearm. It was not built for war. It was built for rescue. And Earth had made sure the whole galaxy watched it happen. Dr. Leo Mendonza stood at the heart of the station's central wing, staring at the dedication plaque. His reflection flickered across the polished metal, years older, shoulders a little heavier. The stethoscope, once belonging to his sister, hung inside a protective case beside the memorial inscription. He hadn't planned to return to orbit, but the council had invited him to speak, formality cloaked in reconciliation. Their diplomats had grown more measured, more cautious. The memory of Earth's retaliation still lingered like a coiled storm on the edge of vision. No one had challenged the accord since. Not after what humanity had done. Outside the docking bay, a delegation waited. Representatives from species once hesitant to meet humans without an armed escort now approached with nods and guarded warmth. Leo greeted them without ceremony. He wasn't a politician. That was part of why they listened. Dr. Mendonza, one of them said, a Quran envoy with a low, reedy voice. We owe a debt. Our colonies, 3 of them, were saved by this platform last year. The supply vessels came without weapons, yet they came faster than our own. Leo offered a tight smile. It's what she would have wanted. Not far from them, Corporal Nira Solis leaned against a railing, watching the room. She'd been reassigned after the war, transferred into Earth's Peace Vanguard, a unit that protected medical installations, not with weapons but with presence. A show of trust and strength if needed. She hadn't fired a weapon in years. She hoped never to again. Yet she still wore the armor. Not out of fear, but remembrance. She approached Leo quietly after the reception, the subtle shift of her boots drawing his attention. They hadn't seen each other since Eos Prime.
Doctor, she said.
Corporal, he replied. Didn't think you'd still be doing this. I didn't think I'd be invited to the dedication of a hospital station. Leo looked around. Engineers worked in the distance, adjusting grav stabilizers. Drones floated along the outer scaffolding, painting the station's final panels. And below, planet-bound refugees waited for processing, families from scattered systems, rescued from civil collapses and war zones. It's more than just a station, he said after a moment. It's a promise. Nira nodded. To the galaxy? To ourselves. Elsewhere on Earth, in a classroom built from recycled orbital plating, a group of children studied the history of the Mendonza Protocol. The teacher, a soft-spoken woman from Luna, walked them through the sequence of events, the attack, the retaliation, the trial, the changes to interstellar law. One girl raised her hand. But why did they think Earth would just do nothing? The teacher hesitated, then answered slowly. Because for so long, we chose diplomacy first. We gave warnings. We built bridges. We believed peace could be taught. And because we never made them fear the alternative. Do they fear us now? No. the teacher said gently. Now they respect us, because we showed that peace is not weakness, and that the ones who carry aid in their hands are never to be struck down. In the council chambers on Ratha Prime, Ambassador Thalanar stood before an assembly far different from the one Korolev had once faced. This council moved slower, yes, but with care. Measured progress had replaced performative outrage. Earth was not feared as an empire. It was regarded as a sentinel, one whose silence could be deadly if tested. As Thalanar concluded a report on the success of the joint relief effort led by the Mendoza platform, he paused. Let history mark the moment, he said, when vengeance was not pursued to conquest, but halted at justice. When Earth showed us that power is not only held in the hand that strikes, but in the hand that heals, even after it bleeds. Back on the station, Leo Mendoza stood alone in the observation deck, staring out across the stars. Somewhere out there, the ruins of the old listening post still floated, a monument to arrogance and miscalculation. No one had touched the wreckage. No one dared. It remained where it was, a ghost drifting through memory. A soft chime alerted him to a message. He opened it. A child's drawing, emailed from Eos Prime. Another ship, again in orange. This one had stars shaped like hands around it. Below, a message in handwriting still unpracticed. We remember who came for us. We remember who stayed. Leo looked down at the drawing for a long time, then closed the message. Outside, the station's beacon pulsed into the void, bright, steady, impossible to ignore. And across that vast emptiness, the stars listened. The relay station on Hydra's edge crackled with static, then resolved into the voice of a panicked transport captain. This is Medical Vessel Hopewell. We're under fire. Coordinates transmitting. Please, anyone. The signal cut, sharp and final. Admiral Kalen Royce stood motionless in the dim glow of the command center aboard the UNSC Ganymede. The report had arrived only moments before, carried on encrypted emergency bands and confirmed by 2 other stations. Another rescue ship. Another attack. And this time, it wasn't a rogue faction. It was an empire. Royce exhaled slowly. The familiar cold settled in her chest. Not fear, but clarity. Orders filtered up from Earth Command even as the fleet began to mobilize. She didn't need to read them. She already knew. The Accord had been tested again, not by chaos or miscommunication, but by deliberate provocation. The Drolith Combine, long simmering at the edges of diplomacy, had chosen to disregard every treaty signed, every memory of Earth's past response. They had gambled that humanity would hesitate again. They would learn. Beneath the command deck, in one of the launching bays, Nira Solis suited up. She had returned to active service 6 months earlier, reassigned to rapid response under the restructured Peace Vanguard. She'd hoped never to wear full combat gear again. Yet when the call came, she hadn't hesitated. There was no fear in her hands as she sealed her helmet. Just focus. Across from her, Sergeant Reyes checked their unit's ammo count. Feels familiar, he muttered. Nira nodded. Same sky. Different fools. Think they know who they just hit? If they don't now, she said, they will. In low orbit above the stricken system, the ruins of the Hopewell drifted, its medical insignias still visible through scorched hull plating. Drones had already begun sweeping for survivors. There were none. The attack had been surgical, decisive, an intentional message wrapped in carnage. Back on Earth, Dr. Leo Mendoza watched the footage in silence. The Hopewell had been part of the expanded outreach mission, operating under the revised Mendoza protocol. He recognized several names in the crew manifest. Friends. Students. Volunteers. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally rose from his chair, he didn't speak to the press or to diplomats. He walked to the underground vault where the Mercy's Reach records were kept, stood before the audio log, and listened to his sister's voice one more time. Then he sent one message to the Office of Earth Command. Do not let this stand unanswered. They struck the hand that heals again. Remind them why we stopped the First War. The UNSC Ganymede arrived in system within 72 hours, flanked by escorts from 5 human-aligned nations and 2 non-human allies who had chosen to stand with Earth. No declarations.
No ceremony.
Just the fleet. Just the flag. Just resolve. On the surface of Drolith Prime's forward-listening post, alarms wailed as the first kinetic strikes hit home. The enemy scrambled, unprepared for the speed, the coordination. They had expected hesitation, a protracted summit, a wall of paperwork before retribution. Instead, they were met by fire. Nira led her team through the outer compound, clearing resistance with swift, silent force. The objective was simple: dismantle command capabilities, expose decision-makers, recover evidence, and leave a message. There were no unnecessary targets. No civilian structures. No indulgence. Just precision. As her team reached the central tower, she spotted a familiar insignia carved into the enemy structure, mockery etched into metal. A crossed-out version of the Earth medical sigil. She paused only to photograph it before detonating the data core. Behind her, Reyes muttered, "They never learn, do they?"
"They will," she replied.
In orbit, Admiral Royce watched the data streams confirm the station's dismantlement. She opened a direct channel to Earth. Operation complete. Assets secured. Target neutralized. Casualties? The voice on the other end asked. None on our side. Full accountability on theirs. Minimal infrastructure damage. Civilian proximity was respected. A pause, then. Public broadcast ready? Royce gave a tight nod. Play it. Across the galaxy, the feed rolled in every major channel. Footage of the Hopewell wreckage. The still frames of her crew. Then the footage of Earth's response, not in violence, but in certainty. The warships appearing like shadows. The precision of their strike. The restoration of the core tenet. You do not harm the ones who come to heal. In a distant hall beneath the Eva Mendoza Memorial Platform, children again gathered for a lesson. Their teacher adjusted the holoscreen to display the newest news reports. One child, no older than 10, asked, "Why do they keep testing us?" The teacher considered her answer carefully. "Because they forget. And some of them weren't there last time. So it becomes our duty, not to punish, but to remind. To make sure the galaxy never confuses kindness for cowardice." The boy nodded, then looked toward the starlight spilling through the viewport. "Will it ever stop?" "Yes," she said softly. "But only if we make it." And high above, drifting in silent watch, Earth's ships waited, not for war, but for peace to be remembered. The wind on Delari 4 was dry and restless, sweeping red dust across the marble steps of the Joint Diplomatic Citadel. Inside, beneath banners that bore the emblems of 17 worlds, 2 envoys stood face to face, one human, one Drolith, neither blinking. Ambassador Lyra Hawthorne's voice did not rise as she addressed her counterpart, but there was no mistaking the weight behind her words. 3 vessels, she said, eyes steady. All clearly marked, all non-combat. You signed the accord. You broke it. The Drolith envoy, Nascalare, spread his claws with studied calm, a gesture of theatrical regret. They were operating too close to a restricted system. Our patrol commander believed they were scouts. They were Triav ships, en route to famine relief. Your commander made a choice. Your government did nothing to stop it. She stepped forward, her voice sharpening. And Earth responded exactly as promised. Ra's expression did not waver, but the set of his shoulders shifted, just slightly. Your reprisal was efficient. It was restrained, she replied. A lesson, not a war. In the silence that followed, it became clear that neither one of them had the appetite for another escalation. The galaxy was holding its breath, watching, calculating. Earth had not become an empire, but it had become something far more unnerving, a force of moral gravity. One that would not conquer, but could not be moved. From orbit, the Mendoza platform maintained a steady geostationary position. Its floodlights scanned across the curvature of Delari's atmosphere, offering both welcome and warning. Inside the platform's upper ward, Dr. Leo Mendoza reviewed updates from the field. The relief teams had reached the famine zone 3 hours ahead of schedule. No resistance. No interference. He watched the footage silently, volunteers unloading nutrient capsules, laying out sanitation kits. One small girl in a torn blanket clung to a medic's leg, eyes wide with exhaustion and awe. A soft chime broke his focus. A visitor waited. Nira Solis stepped through the medbay threshold, dressed in light armor, helmet tucked under her arm. Her presence brought a subtle weight to the room. Not disruptive, but grounding. "Thought you'd be at the Envoy Summit," Leo said. "Finished early," she replied. No shouting. Just carefully chosen disappointment. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. "They're not ready to admit fault," she said. "But they've agreed not to block aid corridors anymore." Small victories. Sometimes those are the ones that last. He leaned back in his chair. When Eva signed up for Mercy's Reach, she used to say there's no such thing as a safe corridor, just people who believe they won't be shot today. Nira's gaze flicked to the stethoscope still hanging in its glass case. She was right. Outside the station, the stars shimmered, brilliant and sharp against the void. Somewhere beyond that light, new alliances were forming, old tensions softening. The second wave of diplomatic reforms, spearheaded by worlds who had once watched Earth with suspicion, had passed unanimously. Not because they feared reprisal, but because they feared failing to live up to what Earth had become. On the ground below, the last of the food convoys rolled into a remote township. Elderly farmers wept openly as crates of hydro seeds were distributed. A water purifier, stamped with Earth's relief insignia, was activated for the first time. And the people there did not cheer for soldiers. They cheered for medics. The memory of vengeance had faded. The memory of aid endured. Back in her quarters aboard the platform, Nira opened a message from Reyes, now stationed in a demilitarized corridor near Varnath space. His message was short, 2 lines. No hostile activity. Locals baked us something called sky bread. Still alive. Still bored. She smiled. In a nearby lounge, Leo joined a group of junior medics for their evening rotation debrief. They spoke of logistics, triads, translation difficulties. But none of them asked if they would be protected. They already knew. When one asked how he handled fear, Leo paused.
"I don't," he said.
"I remember what happened the last time someone struck a healer. I remember what followed." And he said nothing more. Later that night, he stood alone in the observation corridor, watching the distant dance of small transport ships arriving in silent lines. Aid vessels. Research teams. Delegates from once hostile governments now requesting medical cooperation. The galaxy was learning, not just that Earth would protect its own, but that it would protect anyone who tried to build something better. Behind him, the platform's beacon pulsed again into the dark, its coded signal unchanged since the day it first lit. "You are not alone. We will come. We will protect." The stars, listening as always, blinked in return.